Journalism, as we knew it in this country, is dead. Let history record that in 2020, the golden age of American journalism finally expired. It openly committed what I call mediacide.
Sponsored by the books of Edwin Black, available on Amazon and at booksellers worldwide. And now, here's Edwin.
Welcome to the Edwin Black Show. I'm Edwin Black, investigative journalist and historian, author of IBM and the Holocaust, War Against the Weak, Financing the Flames, and many other books. If you like what this show is doing, tell a friend. You can subscribe for passwords at theedwinblackshow.com. It appears today we have viewers from across America. I see strong viewership, as always, in Florida and Michigan, as well as Missouri, Illinois, California, and overseas. In addition, we acknowledge our watch parties that multiply our audience. We now have a third watch party somewhere in Michigan, I think Detroit. The Edwin Black Show is growing globally. We speak to a fragmented world seeking better understanding of our tormented past, our present very tense, and a future still uncertain. After this episode, our production team adds all sorts of graphics to create a highly enhanced rendition of this episode. So please get over to the YouTube channel and subscribe to The Edwin Black Show and hit that notify button. Now for today's very sad episode. Sad for me and sad for our country. Journalism, as we knew it in this country, is dead. Let history record that in 2020, the golden age of American journalism finally expired. It openly committed what I call mediacide. The networks and newspapers pushed specific candidates, ignored and self-censored important news while magnifying small details and fake accusations. They consciously pandered in bogus polls that bore no resemblance to reality and hyped divisive politics. Some 150 million Americans, Democrats and Republicans both, have just signed the death certificate. That is, more than 140 to 150 million essentially voted to reject big media and their pollsters. Specifically, half the country rejected the major liberal media, print and TV, from the Washington Post to the New York Times, and from CNN to MSNBC, rejecting their fake polls and nonstop derogatory coverage by enthusiastically voting for Trump. The other half of the country rejected Fox and its pro-Trump circle, constituting the biggest media TV presence in the country. And on the other hand, they rejected the obviously fake liberal media polls, which assured a Democratic landslide. Thus, the anti-Trump half of the country did not sit home and instead enthusiastically voted against re-electing the president, and they did so during a pandemic. Democracy cannot exist without a free and vibrant press, functioning as the permeable membrane between the governed and governance. But that membrane cannot function if no one believes it. For several years, each side, red and blue, had their own version of the truth. This was the Pravdaization of the media. Now no one knows what to believe. We are told by the media that after years of Democrats accusing Republicans of voter suppression and big-scale fraud, and an equal period wherein Republicans accused Democrats of the same tampering, that this November 3rd, 2020 election was the first election in U.S. history to be free from fraud and meaningful irregularity. Mayor Daley of Chicago would be rolling in his grave. This is simply not believable, especially since one of the key cities, Philadelphia, is considered an epicenter of voter fraud, second only to my hometown of Chicago. Here are some Philly specifics. According to a Department of Justice news release I just accessed, Dominic DeMura, 73, a judge of elections for Philadelphia's 39th Ward, pled guilty in March of this year to accepting bribes to increase ballot results for his co-conspirators. This crime has been repeated by him and his co-conspirators year after year during several election cycles. Additional Philadelphia co-conspirators are even now being prosecuted. Big money was involved. So this crime was not perpetrated for a vote here or there. This crime was perpetrated for lots of votes, enough to swing an election. Here's more. A few years ago, Vice News published an article entitled, "Is Philadelphia the most corrupt city in America?" Earlier this year, Philadelphia Magazine ran a major article entitled, "Philadelphia's, quote, utterly ridiculous history of law breaking among politicians," close quote. But today, the mainstream media has no interest in pursuing credible allegations of electoral misconduct in Philadelphia. I've even seen blatantly false reporting on Fox about Pennsylvania's election law. Fox initially claimed, and falsely, that the law permitted ballots to be counted 3 days after Election Day, when in fact that is not the law. The law calls for an Election Day deadline, but in fact, a recent Pennsylvania State Supreme Court decision modified the will of the legislature and granted 3 extra days for receipt of those ballots. That ruling seems to violate Article 1, Section 4, Clause 1 of the U.S. Constitution, which states, quote, "The times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature," close quote. Likely soon, the U.S. Supreme Court will rule, and their decision may invalidate hundreds of thousands of mail-in votes in Pennsylvania, a risk they knew they were taking. We are told by the media as well that these Republican post-election lawsuits are frivolous and bad for the country. But 300 lawsuits were filed in the weeks leading up to the vote to change those state election laws, including the Pennsylvania statute, thus enabling unsolicited mail ballots and post-election day balloting. You might remember that Democratic candidate Stacey Abrams never conceded the Georgia governor's race, claiming the election was stolen. 20 years ago, the Democrats insisted on litigating for more than 37 days before Al Gore conceded, and that case is still being debated by legal experts. Now we are to somehow believe a media narrative that post-election lawsuits are a threat to our democracy. It's the opposite. Each such lawsuit is a constitutional blessing. Insufficient ones will be thrown out and valid ones will be granted. Thus, both vindicate our democracy and the rule of law. We prefer courtrooms and legal reasonings to the violent coups we see in Latin America, the Middle East, and Africa. The media also now tell us there is no fraud and no reason to suspect fraud in this miracle election. Just getting a Chicago deep dish pizza or a Philadelphia cheesesteak is enough reason to suspect fraud in those cities. But the media does not exercise its constitutional duty, even though we see the pictures and obituaries of dozens of people who voted and have been shown on television. How do dead people vote? It's easy. Unsolicited mail ballots are sent to everyone on the voter rolls, including the dead people who forgot to remove their names after they deceased. These ballots are harvested from mailboxes and by other means. They're filled out and they're mailed back. Thus, enough people can be raised from the dead to trigger the rapture or at least qualify someone for sainthood. We also see more than 200 affidavits attesting to election monitors not being granted meaningful access to observe and monitor. Observe and monitor means up close and personal, not 50 feet away. That's evidence. It needs to be verified, but that's evidence. All of us saw the large postboards go up in the windows of Detroit, yet the media continued to insert the improper qualifier in every headline, quote, without evidence. Now, there are 2 types of election irregularities. Write this down: innocent error and outright fraud. Mistakes happen. bad signatures, improper ballots. Those missteps never add up to more than a handful of votes. But no one commits vote fraud with fake ballots to move just a few votes. It's always organized and systemic and involves big numbers. In Illinois, the scam involved thousands of votes for each and every election cycle. And yes, it was coordinated. I don't have time to go into the claims of software rigging, the 200 odd boxes of votes just discovered in Puerto Rico, the audio recording of election staffers, or the Erie postal worker Richard Hopkins, who claims his boss arranged for backdated ballots, widely reported only for the Washington Post to claim Hopkins formally recanted, only for Hopkins to post a YouTube video denying he recanted and insisting the Post recant its recantation report.
I am right at this very moment looking at a article written by Washington Post. It says that I fabricated the allegations of ballot tampering. I'm here to say that I did not recant my statements. That did not happen. That is not what happened. And you will find out tomorrow. And I would like that the Washington Post recant their wonderful little article that they decided to throw out there out of random.
Who does anyone believe? But we need ground level watchdogs in the media to unmuzzle themselves. This they will not do. Thus brings us to the day journalism actually died. I thought I'd seen every corrupt and crusading editor, every timid and intrepid reporter, every big and small newsroom scandal, but I never thought I would see the day when virtually all of the mainstream media refused to investigate or even carry undenied emails on Hunter Biden's laptop, directly implicating his father, Joe Biden, in a massive kickback and bribery scheme, which were then found on corresponding computers as well. This was the doctor turning his back on an urgent patient, and it was unforgivable. A true journalist has a compulsion to follow the uncomfortable stories. I have done it, and so has an army of other journalists who came before me. Refusing to investigate or even mention the matter was unforgivable malpractice. 3 strikes in one fell swoop during that difficult time. Where are we now? Many in the parties and media have now embraced revenge journalism, becoming platforms for creating and proliferating lists of enemies to exact revenge only by hurting them and their families with personal humiliation tactics, professional blacklisting, and other harassment. The Washington Post published Jennifer Rubin's call for permanent social exile and punishment, cancel culture on steroids. CNN has held similar panels. The Trump Accountability Project, which headlines itself with the words, quote, "We must never forget those who furthered the Trump agenda." This links to Trump Town, a revenge database of anyone who worked with Trump, big or small. It has a searchable and growing database of 3,858 appointees, 281 lobbyists, 150 think tank personalities, and 263 people who just worked for the Trump campaign groups. And who is running the database? A joint project of the journalists at ProPublica and Columbia Journalism Review, and the efforts of dozens of other journalists. We even see organized proliferation of efforts to harass Jones Day, the law firm representing many Trump legal challenges. Jones Day attorneys have been targeted. Their corporate customers, such as Verizon and GM, have been hounded. And the Lincoln Project has even granted a $500,000 grant for hit ads, which the major networks and newspapers will happily run for big dollar prices. Trump said the major media was the enemy of the people, and many laughed. Now we see the cream of the major media targeting millions of Americans for revenge and humiliation. This is the healing machine. You want lists? It wasn't enough for you to be either red or blue. Now you want to turn this country brown. You want brown? Hitler made lists. Stalin made lists. Saddam made lists. McCarthy made lists. Chinese communists still make lists. Is this a noble media mission? In a Hill poll, 70% of Republicans say they do not trust election results. That is, they reject the media's assertion. about the Biden win. People left and right are turning out, relying on rumor, Twitter, WhatsApp. So many people tell me they cannot even stand to watch or read the news. Where do we go from here? Fake news and superficial news will multiply exponentially. There is actually a European city that specializes in fake news. It's the city of Veles, Veles, a broken down coal mining center in Macedonia, which has experienced a rebirth, creating dozens of instantly, mainly fake publications with real sounding names, spewing nonsense for clickbait and dark purposes. It will take our world years to rebuild its media trust, but the media we need is not just talkers. We need fact finders, fact testers, people on the ground and in the trenches, asking questions, digging for details, and carefully curating confirmation along ethical lines. That type of organization is like the AP, the Associated Press, Reuters, and it takes a lot of money and expertise to establish, and it needs judgment. The judgment of seasoned ethical editors who must evaluate the noise. The necessity of a truthful press comes directly from the Bible. The ninth commandment demands, quote, "You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor," close quote. Proverbs 6:16 tells us there are 6 things that the Lord strongly dislikes, close quote. These include, quote, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, a false witness who breathes out lies, and one who sows discord among brothers. I'm done for now. I turn it over to learned panelists. I decided against asking my friends in leadership media positions, as they would just defend what they do. So I've asked some regulars with media management experience, political insider Josh Block, who has worked with hundreds of media outlets, maybe thousands, crisis manager Judah Engelmeyer, who works with scores of media worldwide every week, and Alex Trayman, JNS Jerusalem bureau chief, one of the bright and stunning new upstarts in the media, picking up where others left off. Josh has to exit first, so take it away, Josh.
Well, I was struck by what you were saying, Evan, because for the last handful of years, I've been concerned and remain increasingly concerned that there's a lack of common point of reference. And media and journalism, objective journalism, top-down, fact-based journalism, used to provide people a way to understand what was taking place from a common perspective. But now you've got people bringing their own facts to the dialogue and refusing to accept anyone's common purpose. And as you pointed out, journalists are themselves taking on political campaigns, tracking down Trump appointees. I mean, it's pretty surprising. So, I think we all ought to be concerned that journalism is not continuing its tradition of objectivity. And maybe we had a honeymoon in America. We were unusual in the world in the way we had journalism. It helped make us the greatest country in the world. I hope we can sustain that tradition.
All right. So anyway, I know that some people had a problem with hearing your audio, but I would just like to ask, you were one of those who actually survived and was in the front row of the Gore litigation in the year 2000, correct?
Yeah.
All right. And were you dealing with lots of media at that time?
Well, yes and no. Yeah, I was involved in the Gore campaign in Florida. And, when that recount was taking place, I'd already come back to Washington, D.C. But I was, of course, involved in that process, no doubt.
As one who was involved in litigation that lasted 37 days for the Democrats, what do you think about the calls now that there should be no litigation, that litigation is an unpatriotic act, et cetera?
Well, look, I think it is entirely understandable that the Republican Party and the president want to see all the votes counted fairly and appropriately. I don't think there's anything wrong with that question. The fact that the Associated Press has come out and said that they've determined that the math is insurmountable for the president is good enough for other media organizations, and it's good enough for the press to report. It's good enough for a lot of politicians and other world leaders, but it's not good enough for the Constitution. So, it's a legitimate process. John Yoo, who's a conservative attorney, made the point today that it's very unlikely that all these challenges will add up to overturning or to winding up with a president-elect Trump rather than a president-elect Biden. That being said, it is the right thing to do to go through the process to finish the vote and make sure all the votes are counted in the Constitution. So we'll see how it goes.
All right. Now, I can assure you that Josh is one of the most fluid and elegant speakers that I know. So if you got a broken up sound from him, don't worry about that. It's the problem of Zoom, not Josh. You are the Jerusalem Bureau Chief of JNS, and your news service, the Jewish News Service, has flourished in recent years, primarily because a vacuum is being created by the problems in the Jewish media with proper and reliable coverage. Tell us what you think about the situation in general, and then feel free to weigh in on the problems in the Jewish media.
I mean, obviously, people want to know about the election. And I think one of the reasons why the media went so hard against the president during these last several years is because really the media actually put Trump into the White House. Remember in 2016, Trump spent actually much less dollars than his opponents spent during the campaign. And the reason he was able to catapult into the presidency was because the media couldn't take their eyes off of him. I kind of knew, or I had a hunch, that President Trump was going to win office during the campaign the moment he attacked Megyn Kelly of Fox. People might remember that he famously attacked Megyn Kelly. And at that moment, the left-leaning media, including CNN and MSNBC and all the papers, they jumped all over that because they couldn't believe that a Republican candidate would be so naive as to attack the number one show host. Megyn Kelly had the 9 o'clock slot on Fox and was the highest rated show host in all of America. And so when Trump did that, all the other media jumped in. And from that moment forward, at least 60 to 70% of every single headline relating to the presidential election in 2016 started with the word Trump. And so it was the media that put Trump into the White House. And at that time, they understood that they had to go on a campaign. And it was shortly after, I think it was in February of 2017, actually, that the Washington Post actually changed their motto maybe they didn't have a motto beforehand, and underneath the masthead, Washington Post, said, "Democracy dies in darkness."
Well, they have certainly turned off the lights, haven't they?
Absolutely. And I think if you want to look at what's going on here, if you want to, we do Jewish news over here. I have Zohar behind me, but if you want to take a more spiritual look at what's going on, today, your social media feed, your cell phone is the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Okay. And everybody has to decide whether every piece of information that they see is on the side of good, which is the side of truth, or on the side of evil, which is lies. Because today in everything, you have two completely different narratives with no bridge in between. You have either one narrative over here and one over here. One is right and one is wrong, or one is 100% right and one is partially right. You have to decide always. And one thing that I said in a speech a few years ago is that your Facebook feed is actually social media communism. Because what happened is that they took media, and that was either mainstream media that's well-funded, or that was some startup blogger on the side that was publishing, and they put everybody into the same box with the same size headline, the same size photo, the same amount of text underneath, and you no longer had the opportunity to discern just from seeing that block, that brick, whether that was a reputable brick or an unreputable brick.
So you are referring to the fact that the newspapers used to have a big story, a smaller story, and a little story, and that reflected the magnitude of the story, correct?
When you went to the newsstand, you could tell which paper, the New York Times, that was the paper, because they were putting the money into printing. You could see, okay, that you could see which are the big papers, you could see which are the magazines. You can tell based on the quality of the publication what you're looking at. But when you're looking on a Twitter feed or on your Facebook feed, you can't tell. You have to click through. And by the time you click through, then you're caught up. You have to decide, what it is that you're looking at. That's a choice that you have to make all the time. And that's a choice that ultimately not everybody can make wisely on a regular basis. And now if you're talking about social media communism with the censorship of political content, that we're following right after communist China by doing that.
And I should note that Facebook and Twitter have just extended their ban on political ads for yet another 30 days. That means that the political parties, Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, Green, Independent, cannot get their message out. And I don't think that they have that right. And speaking of rights, you said that the media was hard on Trump because they had actually boosted his journey to the White House. Did they have the right to be hard on Trump? Did they have the right to stilt their coverage? Or did they have to say, let's make up for any errors we made by being professional in the future?
No, journalism is today's entertainment. There's no more such thing as objective journalism. That died in darkness. The Washington Post told you that. Today, opinion shows are the #1 shows. You know, look on who's getting the most views. Tucker Carlson, Sean Hannity. People don't want to hear the facts. They want to hear your opinions. This is entertainment. It's an entertainment business. That's why it was.
But the problem here is that Tucker and Sean do not have armies of journalists in the field who are going in and verifying. They're into news analysis, although I agree with you that Tucker is leading the way. Tucker, of course, has a great deal of newsman experience from the Hill.
Absolutely. You know, I think that you also asked me a question about Jewish journalism. And what we've seen is just as the Washington Post and the New York Times and CNN and MSNBC have taken hard, sharp turns to the left, also in Jewish media, you see the same patterns where you know, publications that either had right-wing audiences or were, you know, straight publications, they've also taken a sharp left turn, and it's actually done a tremendous disservice to the Jewish communities in America, because these publications are reflexively anti-Trump, who was probably the best president that Israel's had, you know, in the White House in a long time. They're anti-Netanyahu, prime minister that's dramatically changed Israel's standing in the world, economically, militarily, diplomatically, and they're against him. They're against the Jewish religion. They're against the religious people. They're against settlers, you know, that are living in the biblical Jewish homeland in Judea and Samaria. Jews are
well, now I should mention that not everyone knows that almost every major city, even some small cities, have their own Jewish weekly. That means there's some 50 or 60 Jewish publications. There are wire services. And as you know, I'm syndicated to about 35 of those papers. And I'm proud of the fact that the same articles that I syndicate to the left-leaning ones are published also by the right-leaning ones. But we have found that except for JNS, the Allgemeiner, and a number of publications like yours, that many in the Jewish media have lost their way. Now I'm going to turn to our friend Judah Engelmeyer. Judah, how many journalists a week during one of your crisis periods do you work with?
I probably work with, I would say, 90 to 100 journalists on a given week about various different issues and various different clients.
And would you call these amongst the major media in the United States?
I would have to say, well, they consider themselves the major media in the United States.
Okay, so we're talking about the big city media, the big network.
For the most part, the big city media, the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, CNN, Fox News, Financial Times, Business Journal, New York Law Journal, I guess American Law Media, ALM Network was Law Media, Los Angeles Times, Washington Post, things like that. But then, you know, all second tiers too, third tiers, industry trades, things like that.
What do you find? Are the media alive and kicking, or is journalism dead the way I suggested?
So I would have to say that you're more correct than not. Journalism is not what it used to be. It's not alive and kicking. Even, you know, let's first go back to non-presidential politics and non-politics. I work in litigation with lawyers dealing with lawsuits, and you find in the industry trades, journalists take sides, decide who's right and who's wrong in these fights too, and they'll decide to badmouth and malign or continue beating up on a particular issue or client of mine for what they believe to be right or wrong, regardless what testimony is heard in court, regardless what comes up. And it's something that we've been dealing with for several years already. And I think the Trump era has just expanded on that, and it's made it more clear to everybody. What I thought it was going towards an ideological direction years ago, in the 2015, 2016, the Trump era has multiplied that and made everybody know it as well. I would have to say that also. Listen, I respect Alex a lot and what he has to do, but he's trying to be kind to his friends by saying that it's guilt that made them cover Trump this time around. But it's not guilt. It's journalists turning into activists, trying to imbue their opinion and forcing their will upon what they think we're too stupid to understand. How could 70 million people vote for Donald Trump? We just don't understand. We're just too dumb to appreciate that he's not the right person. And that's kind of how they go at it. And you don't just see them apologizing for, oh, we got Trump and therefore we're going to cover him. We're going to cover him at great lengths right now. But you see condescension. You watch CNN, watch some of these anchors. They condescend. I mean, they're obnoxious, they're arrogant. But then again, they also don't go after the other candidate. Look how they cover Joe Biden. Look how they cover Barack Obama. It's almost like a cakewalk. Nobody, like you said, very few, not nobody, questioned Joe Biden on Hunter Biden. It's like the issue disappeared. However, I would posit that if Donald Trump's son was had a problem like that, it would have been headline news every single day until the election. Trump, Biden got a cakewalk. Now you saw his press conference the other day. They asked Biden, oh, how do you feel? Had you called Donald Trump? Are you feeling good today? Is the sun out? Those are the questions they're asking Joe Biden. Nobody wants to ask him hard questions. Nobody wants to give him a hard time.
What about his favorite color?
The point is that journalism is no longer what it used to be, and it's a very, very sad place to see. It's very sad to say, and I disagree with Alex when he said that the people want to see these opinion shows. The people are watching. It's all that's out there. I think there are people out there, millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions maybe, around the world who want to see real news. They just don't know where to go. You ask me this question all the time. Where do people go? We have to read 10 different sources so I could distill out what I find to be the truth. Where do you go for real, bona fide news, objective news, where I can form my own opinion based on what's presented, not where the opinion is being forced at me? There's no place to go anymore. But they're doing it for ratings. They're doing it because they're ideologues. They're doing it because the whole world has changed. You look at the entire the entire roster of what the progressive politicians want to accomplish. They don't care that 70 million people don't want it. They don't care that half the Democratic Party doesn't want that. They believe that's the direction. That's what they're going to fight for. And then we have media that falls in line with that and says, we're going to start reporting it. We're going to push those agendas. It's a very sad place to say. It's a very sad place to be right now. And it's difficult for a guy like me who does public relations crisis media for a living to try to get reporters to be objective. And I'm dealing with issues right now that have nothing to do with the election. A very prominent New York City issue right now, but I'm not going to talk about it on the air here. But reporters are lining up against the issue my client is taking, not even looking at evidence. Just if somebody suggests something bad or something nefarious, they write that. That's the headline. And then at the very bottom of a 800-word article is a sentence, oh, the client or Engelmeyer's client said X, Y, and Z about it. Like that's the ink they give to the denial, and everything else is rumor, allegation, nothing concrete. And at the very end, we deny it. Then they claim that's not biased reporting.
I've seen a new level of attribution according to a source familiar with the topic. What does that mean, Alex?
Yeah, absolutely. You're seeing that all the time. People don't, they're willing to quote sources aren't going to come forward. And you don't know what that means. That could be the guy sitting across from you in the news desk saying, yeah, I heard from my friend that this isn't true. I saw a tweet that somebody said that this politician did that. And now that's becoming news. So, there's no integrity for most journalists. People just running with things.
Well, and Alex, I would say that it's not just integrity. It's because they believe they're there for social justice purposes. So Absolutely. If they believe an opinion, if they believe a position, they're gonna posit in their article any way they can to get that across. But they will say, "Oh, I put it in quotes. I did say it was alleged." But but it's not the primary thing they're writing about. And
social justice has become a new religion,
right? And the new journalism.
And something I've also maintained that a journalist is judged not only by what he publishes, but what he doesn't publish. Now,
That's absolutely right. Yes.
Alex is aware that a person like me bumps into lots of information, some of it scandalous, and it's got to be checked out, and it's got to be newsworthy, and
Listen,
it's got to be appropriate.
In our newsroom, the only time where you're going to be able to have an anonymous source is if this is a military operation and there is a specific security reason why that person cannot be identified, but we have to absolutely be able to identify that source. But if somebody came to me that I know who that source was, and I know that was a senior person, but he can't reveal himself for different security or diplomatic reasons. But when it comes to politics, you shouldn't. You see this all the time, especially in Jewish media. People's anonymous source said that Netanyahu said this in a meeting. If you're not willing to put your name behind that, then a newspaper shouldn't run.
In fact, I remember vividly now that some days ago, it was revealed that Anonymous from the New York Times was not a senior White House official, which means, of course, cabinet president, vice president at that level, but was in fact a second or third line official in Homeland Security in a different building. And so I felt that was an absolute lie.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these people are willing to, throw bombs at other people and try to destroy their careers, but protecting their own paycheck by remaining behind the shade of anonymous.
I now want to call in two people who are not media professionals. Josh is a media professional, media management. Judah and Alex is. I want to call a guy from the conservative community. I was going to get one from the progressive and liberal side. We'll get to that in a minute. Just in 60 seconds, I'm going to bring in Kenneth Abramowitz. You just published a book, The Multi-Front War, where you dealt with these kinds of issues, but you're not a media professional. You're just someone who's very conversant with conservative circles. Just in 60 seconds, have you become disillusioned with conservative and or liberal media?
Yes. Liberal media has basically adopted the policy of the Bolsheviks from 1917, and I'm sure before 17, but the Bolsheviks published a very famous newspaper called Pravda, which meant truth. But in reality, nothing in the newspaper was truthful. And so our media, unfortunately, has adopted that strategy of basically aligning itself with a given political party and then defining whatever that political party believes in to be truth.
So do you believe what you read and see?
Well, when I read the so-called liberal, which I don't actually call them liberal, they're regressives. They want to take us back to the 1917 Pravda. When I read it, each sentence, I have to say, is this true? Is this fake news? Is this propaganda? In the olden days, the propaganda would be on the editorial page, and then you knew that the editor had a right to say whatever the editor believed in or the newspaper believed in, but you expected news to be on the news pages. Now the editorial page is in every paragraph and in every sentence, and you just have to be very discerning as a reader to segregate. It's not so easy for the average public to discern news and fake news and propaganda and editorialization.
All right, listen, we've only got a minute for you, and now we're going to get the liberal point of view. Thank you very much for joining us, Ken. We're going to get the liberal point of view. Unfortunately, our liberal person isn't with us because we had a wonderful liberal from San Francisco, a progressive, a good friend of ours, who was just going to give his opinion, but he had a scheduled problem at the end. So I'm going to...
Oh, I thought he was told that he was going to be canceled if he came on the show.
No, I don't think so. Maybe it's possible, but no one is ever canceled for coming on to my show. So I'm going to give his point of view because he briefed me on. He felt that all the media now today, now that the golden age has turned tarnished, the media today are big corporate media. Who owns these media? You look at the Washington Post, it's owned by Bezos. You look at CNN, it's a big corporate job. You look at ABC, you look at Disney's involved. So these are all MSNBC.
MSNBC.
Well, now let's see how old anybody here is. Does anybody know how MSNBC got its name, Alex?
It was Microsoft venture.
Microsoft.
That's right. It was Microsoft and NBC making a network, and so they called it MSNBC. All right. So anyway, I hope I've given the counterbalance to what Ken said. So even the liberals find that they cannot believe what they read, because if they did believe it, they might have stayed home instead of waiting in lines for 4 hours to vote, because the liberal line was Trump was going to be trounced. And if no one can believe what they hear, then we're in a very, very bad place in this country. Now I'm going to get to our questions. Scotty in the Villages. This is like his fourth question. We have a watch party in the Villages. What do you know about Newsmax? I am sick of Fox. All right, so I did a little research here.
Chris Ruddy is a good guy, but it's very conservative, and they lean conservative. As much as sometimes they tell people what they want to hear, they're also they're idealistically right-leaning, and I'm not sure that their news is reliable for anyone who doesn't.
Well, they don't have a news operation. It's one
Right.
thing to put a guy up on the screen and have him read from a script and analyze. Now, I've done some numbers for these guys, and during the early part of the year, they had an average about 25,000 viewers at any given time. During election night, they had 182,000 viewers. After Fox called Arizona and Kayleigh McEnany was cut off mid-sentence by Neil Cavuto, their nightly viewing has now gone up to 700 to 800,000 viewers. But remember something, it's all just guesswork. They're just repeating what they heard and didn't personally verify. Some people on my staff know that I was presented with a list of many, many people who voted, who were born in 1800, who were born in 1901. We couldn't confirm it. We wouldn't even give it the benefit of a good mention until we could get it more confirmed. So that's the Newsmax question, but it just shows that people are going to be going to Twitter, to Newsmax, to One American News, to people with no news orientation, no news experience. All right, this comes from Magda in London. I follow the show and your work, Mr. Black. You are a human rights historian. What qualifies you and your panelists to judge journalism? Okay, well, first of all, people who know me know that I began in journalism in the golden age of journalism in Chicago. That time there were 4 daily newspapers. A newspaper sometimes came out 5 and 7 times a day. There were numerous weeklies. I did investigative journalism from the beginning. I was known for my major investigations in Chicago. I've gone undercover numerous times. I had a .357 Magnum famously put up to my head on camera when I was investigating the taxi cab industry. Naturally, I've been a war correspondent. I covered the Battle of Suez City, the Battle of Fayed, a few other battles. I'm known for my investigations. I carried that over into my historian work, where I used those skills to nail IBM and the Holocaust for organizing and co-planning the Holocaust. Now, let me tell you something. You don't get to say that IBM consciously engaged in the mass murder of 6 million people without your facts straight. I took the same approach to General Motors, to the Ford Foundation, to numerous other groups. So I specialize in the impossible cases. And because I've worked for so many publications, I have a very good understanding of how they work. I've seen the best and the worst newsrooms in the country, the most ethical and the most corrupt. Alex, what qualifies you, other than being in touch with media every day, to judge journalism?
Well, if you look at the journalists, they're not necessarily qualified to judge the politicians that they are either promoting or degrading. So I think that once journalism, goes towards the sewer and becomes entertainment, well, I think that every single person has. I don't have to have a right as a journalist. I'm as a media consumer. So I have a right to judge what I'm watching and say that this is quality, this is garbage. I think that a lot of the media that I'm digesting is garbage today. I don't need a qualification to weigh in on that. But of course, I do try to put on a better, put out something that's better, that is reliable. And that's why we have our own ethical standards of journalism. But, I think that the reason why our readership is growing so quickly is because people recognize that we're high quality. And even though we're perfectly happy to applaud a president that does something good for Israel or a prime minister that does something good for the state of Israel, we also deliver our articles to liberal Jewish newspapers in America. And if they didn't think that what we were doing was high quality, they'd cut us off. So
And I think it's interesting. A couple of days ago, you decided to, at JNS to host your first webinar, and you thought a few dozen people were going to show up. Is that correct?
Well, we were hoping for more than a few dozen, but within an hour of opening it up, we had 1,300 people signed up for that, and we're always impressed by our own exponential growth. But we're growing so quickly right now because people don't trust the sources that have presented themselves as being truthful, as being right down the middle. Like when the Times of Israel first launched themselves, they said this is a centrist publication. Nobody can open up the Times of Israel today and say that's a centrist publication. Nobody would say that. So, if the media is lying to you, you're allowed to call them out on that, and you should call them out. And if we put out a story that's no good, people should come out and say that story's no good. I mean, that's the only thing that will keep journalists accountable is if the viewers and the readers will digest it.
All right, now I'm not going to ask the same question to Judah because Judah's already told us he works with so many media each and every day. He judges them on the receiving end. But
I would say something different. I think that as human beings who read every day and watch these news, that we are qualified to be judges of the media and be judges of the news because we're the ones consuming it. They're reporting to us. They're trying to convince us to watch them, to read them. So of course we're the judges. The guy who wrote the question is a valid judge of the media.
That's right. That's a great observation because every moment they're on trial, every moment of every day. And it's like we like to say, all right, you did great yesterday. What have you done for me lately?
Right.
Okay, let's go to Chuck in Toronto and 4 other people. So who can we believe? I'm going to have to turn it over to Judah. Who do we believe?
Believe me when I talk, because I never lie. I would tell you that it's a very difficult question to answer, and I would say what I've said on the show several times before. You have to, first of all, read and look and watch more than one source. You have to follow the news stories, and then you find the kernels of truth and the kernels that connect and parallel in every one of those stories that you're reading, and then you can discern what really happened, and then you can try to figure out for yourself what went on. It's not always that simple. But it's hard. I'm not going to go and give you a source right now. JNS actually happens to be a good source of news. I like it better than JTA. I like it better than some of the other news, some of the news, the Jewish organizations that present news these days that are affiliated with larger companies, as well. JNS came out, I think, 10 years ago, and they've been fantastic because they are a centrist. They do publish both sides of the spectrum and try to deliver what they can. But in terms of general news, I don't know. If there's a single source anymore. I think you have to be smart. You can't just take anyone's word for it. You have to read up, do your research, and you have to just be a good judge. You have to. People just can't sit back and let things get thrown at them anymore.
So basically, you can't be a lazy consumer.
And that's what the news relies on us to be. But
right.
Yes.
Okay, let's take another question here. Debbie in St. Louis. What is yellow journalism? Okay, I'll answer this one if I can, then I'll throw it if anyone wants to. You've heard the term fake news. The concept of fake news has been taught in every U.S. high school for many, many generations, but they called it yellow journalism. I believe it was Hearst of the Hearst newspapers who said, you give me the photo and I'll provide the war. And that's when they used to trump up fake incidents, basically to get America into a war, because war was a kind of a good thing to these guys. It meant coverage. But I can tell you as a historian, I've studied publications going back, and I can tell you that the Jewish people have a great deal of experience with fake news, with the protocols of the elders of Zion, with the accusations of the blood libel that were printed in Kishinev in the last century, the numerous publications which were published by the Third Reich. In fact, you will remember that The editor of one of those publications in Nazi Germany, Streicher, was put on trial for war crimes at Nuremberg for complicity in genocide under the Genocide Treaty. So yes, it's possible for an editor to commit a war crime. Just because the Nazis publish a mass circulation publication does not mean it's journalism. Or as I like to say, he who possesses a typewriter is not necessarily a journalist, in the same way as he who possesses a piano is not necessarily a concert pianist. Now, there was a golden age. I don't know if it was Judah or Josh who 1 or 2 episodes ago said, well, we had a golden age in journalism. And maybe that started with Sinclair Lewis. And maybe it started even before that. But I'm going to call it a 20th century phenomenon. And now we are falling into exactly the same pattern that Arab countries, that East European countries, that Latin America and African countries have fallen into. They cannot trust the news that they get, and they struggle for alternative sources. Alex, what do you say?
Well, I think like one of the great case studies of your, for me anyway, was I always used to like watching Meet the Press. And, like Tim Russert would host Meet the Press. You'd get the Republican view, you get the Democrat view, you get a panelist that was mixed, and they would have a great panel. And then also David Gregory took over after Tim Russert passed away. And he tried to be like Tim Russert, but didn't have the same energy. And eventually they took him out and they replaced him with Chris Todd. And you saw immediately that this was not the same thing anymore, that this thing was going to move and become something totally different. I mean, to me, the things that really bother me today in the media is that you see the same talking points being repeated, parroted on multiple stations every day. So then you have to wonder who's writing those talking points.
And you always see the same phrases.
Right, exactly. Like you can go onto YouTube and you could see mashups of people talking about Trump and saying, what Trump did today is a danger to democracy. And then you see 80 people say the same thing, that danger to democracy, danger to democracy. So who's writing that and feeding it to all of these different media on the same day? That's number one.
The Democratic National Committee.
Right, exactly. And then number 2 is the censorship. And to me, this came on very fast. And I actually wanted to know, like, how did we get to this point? And I think that COVID actually has played a tremendous role in this. And people should look this up themselves. But there was a pandemic exercise that was run at the Johns Hopkins Center for Health and Security that was funded by the World Economic Forum and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They did a whole pandemic exercise of a coronavirus pandemic in Johns Hopkins. It was in October. Okay. Now there was many recommendations that were made at that time, but if you look deep into what they did, so part of their discussions were that there was going to be a tremendous amount of what they call misinformation and disinformation about a pandemic and also about the ways to treat a pandemic. And the recommendations that came out of Event 201 for how to deal with this was that social media companies should actually censor information that the World Health Organization deemed to be false information, misinformation or disinformation. And we saw that in the beginning of COVID, and that was really the first time that you would see censorship that wasn't hate speech or incitement on social media. And yet immediately that transitioned from this misinformation or disinformation about health, which sometimes is also censoring real doctors, just giving their medical opinions from their own experiences in hospitals, and then immediately transitioned to being able to censor political content. And that is something that is very, very dangerous, and it's gotten lost in this whole pandemic crisis and also in the political crisis of having a Trump presidency.
So Edwin, I would say that yellow journalism is not entirely false journalism. It's taking kernels of truth and spinning it the way you want. And it's taking, I tell every client, whenever we give a statement to the media, make sure every single word in that statement can stand on its own, because reporters will take half of your statement if it benefits the story they want to use. And then they can say, you said it, and it's not a lie. You did say that. You didn't say, they didn't put it in context, but that's fine. Take a look at what Trump did in Charlotte, North Carolina, with good people on all sides. He didn't say there were good people amongst the skinheads. In fact, you watch his whole statement uncut. He said the people trying to defend statues not coming down, there were good people on both sides of the argument. He emphatically said skinheads and white supremacists were bad people. He emphatically said that. But the fact that there are good people on all sides, the media took that clip of him saying there are good people on all sides, the skinheads, and therefore it looked like he was saying there are good people who are skinheads on all sides. And that's what has and that is considered the edible journal. That's when you're spinning, you're taking almost truth and making everyone believe your point of view, and then you can't be accused of lying. You can be accused of spinning, of pushing an ideology, but you're not lying or making it up, because in fact the president did say those words, not in the same context. But that's what yellow journalism become. That's become the leading journalism, as opposed to.
But a truthful quote that is set forth as a false statement is in fact false.
Well, you're an old timer, Edwin.
I am an old timer.
And then you also have that connect the dots journalism, where statement, and then they connect it to something else, and they say, well, that person is against LGBTQ, so he's a racist. So you're a racist too, because you said something that was picked up by a media that printed an article about something else that you had nothing to do with, and then all of a sudden, like, you're a bigot, So
exactly.
Let's the hatchet job. That's the hatchet.
Things that were said here in the last moment lead us to our next question. Renata in Newton. I don't know if this is from our watch party there, and I hope you're all socially distancing there. What is the role of big tech in the news media today? Isn't it all the same? And I think this invokes the question of censorship. I'm going to throw it to Judah first.
The problem with big tech is that they have a vested interest in seeing news come out the way they want and seeing the candidates win that'll support their initiatives. Big tech happens to be run by people who are more on the more progressive side. Therefore, they allow censorship on Twitter. They allow censorship on Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg can go ahead and say that whatever the president says something about COVID should be knocked out, but if you deny the Holocaust, that's allowed. I think that was actually Twitter. Jack Dorsey said that. But look, what they do is they decide what's best for their readership, what's best for their numbers, what's best for their subscription base, and they will allow that stuff to go forward. And the less popular stuff, they can go ahead and criticize and say is that they are protecting us from unwanted news sources or for unfound news sources. Big tech plays a huge role because the public watches, pays attention, and lives off it these days. And it's a major problem. And I don't have the answer for it because we're allowed to use it too. But now if you say the wrong thing, you can get blocked out, or you get that mark saying we don't endorse this. But Jack Dorsey said it on television in front of Congress the last time that Donald Trump has said things wrong, so he could censor it. But Holocaust denial it's an opinion. And
no, you're not going to tell anyone now that subject to Section 230 of the CDA that these people are not publishers. They are, in fact,
they are publishers. They're 100% publishers. They're publishers of news. They have a responsibility, but they shirk it and they get around. Listen, it's the old way that Uber and Lyft got around the taxi laws and restrictions by saying we're a tech company, not a taxi company. And that's how they're doing it. They're saying they're not news. They are a tech company. They're not a news provider.
And when it comes to Facebook, you have the straight out censorship where they cancel your post, but then you also have the algorithmic censorship, which is people that are saying the types of things that we want said get promoted.
Right.
More people see their posts, and less people are going to see your posts if we don't like the stuff that you're saying. Now, Facebook is a very interesting case because Facebook also owns other major social media, including Instagram, but more importantly for this discussion, WhatsApp. And WhatsApp in general is much more about private messaging. Right. And so on Facebook, people really control themselves, especially conservatives are very wary about putting their opinions on Facebook because how it might be taken by liberals that see it. Okay, so in a sense, you're going to have like a stilted conversation on Facebook that's going to lean towards liberal, where a lot of conservatives are afraid to say what they want to say on Facebook. But on WhatsApp, they're all sending all the links and the memes and everything. But Facebook sees that too because they own WhatsApp. So they know how people really feel, right? They have that indication about what's actually trending. And then they can use that in order to determine what their algorithms are going to be on Facebook.
All right, I have a bunch more questions here. We're going over time, but stay as long as you can, folks. Here's one from Daniel. I'm not sure where he's from. He says the days of voter fraud in Chicago are over. In the past 10 years, more than 9 million votes were cast. Only 10 votes were referred to the Attorney General's office. No changes of election results occurred. There's more to his comment. I would just say that while I understand that you might think that Chicago is ready for reform, they used to say Chicago ain't ready for reform. I would remind you that Jesse Smollett just skated right through the judicial process in Chicago. The machine is alive and well in Chicago, and not only controls the votes in Chicago, they also control the votes in downstate Illinois. So, Daniel, thank you for your question. And the better question when it involves Chicago is the most important question. Is it thick or thin pizza that you really like? Okay, so here's another one from Wes in San Francisco. What about Fox News? Is it propaganda or not? I'm going to answer first, then I'll throw it to Judah and Alex. I'm going to say, I believe that the Fox reporters and correspondents are the best correspondents, the best reporters being fielded today. But you have to discriminate between the actual correspondents, the people in the field, and the opinion shows, the analysis shows, the commentary shows. You've got Tucker, you've got Hannity, you've got Laura, you've got Don Lemon, it's CNN, all of these different things. It's the same way with the newspapers. They have big news operations, they have advice columnists, they have conservative columnists, they have liberal columnists, they have bridge columnists, travel writers, crosswords, they have different features. And so I say that while the commentary is, of course, what I would call propagandistic in the extreme, the news quality, the stuff we hear from John Roberts and the stuff we hear from the Middle East correspondents is the one that I consider the most reliable. Take it away, Judah.
Well, I used to tell people when they ask me, what do you think of Fox News? I say, you know what? They tell me the lies I want to hear, so it's good. So listen, there are good journalists in just about every organization. It's up to the producers, the editors, and on the shows, the ones who lead the shows, the key anchors and the hosts. I would say the problem that you have with Fox News, the same problem you have with CNN, is that the reasons Fox News became big, it was an answer to CNN's left-leaning. So automatically, Fox News is right-leaning. So I'm not saying that's good or bad, just saying that, they have a political bent. So, it still comes down to, are they reliable for some things, not for everything? But you have to be aware of that. People watch Fox News because they are more conservative. It's not that they want real news. They want to hear what they want to hear. And that's why people watch CNBC, MSNBC, CNBC, and ABC, and all those other things too. There are good people and real journalists amongst all of them. They can't get through their newsrooms. They can't get through their editors. They can't get through their producers. That's the problem.
And that's very important. We need to understand that there's the article and then getting the article through the newsroom, through the editor. We have the extraordinary case of Glenn Greenwald, who founded The Intercept, who just resigned. He's on the edge of aggressive, intrepid journalism, an edge that I won't even go to. And he just resigned in a flourish because he said he was censored by his own publication. Now, I have one here from Christine in Indiana. How do we teach or encourage critical thinking skills necessary to digest the news in an intelligent way? Let me ask Alex, how do people figure out how to differentiate between the good reporting and the bad reporting?
Well, first of all, if reporting is consistently partisan, then it's probably not good reporting, right? Like if everything that President Trump does is evil, then that's not good reporting. But if everything that President Trump did is amazing, then that's also not good reporting. So that's like a good way of starting with it. Are you talking about an issue? Are you telling me the history of an issue? Are you telling me why an issue is contextually important?
And context is important.
Context is so important, right? It's not just like, oh, President Trump said that if we drink bleach, then that's going to solve coronavirus. Like, that's not news, okay? It's not, people all the time talking about like this person tweeted something. If somebody tweeted something, it's probably not news, okay? It's there. Today, you don't even know people that voted for or against President Trump. They can't name 10 things that President Trump did in policy that they either support or they don't support. right? So that's how you know that people are not getting news. I mean, the president of the United States made so many executive orders, made so many different policy decisions that can affect the United States and other countries for years, and people don't even know what they are.
And Alex, how is it possible that the Abraham Accords, with two Arab countries flying into the White House lawn, was not covered by the networks in a big way? On the nightly news, it was a 15 to 30-second reader in the middle of the newscast. How
Right.
do you explain that?
This is like a biblical paradigm shift where the Sunni Muslims and the Jews are making peace together. But two things. Number one, it happened on the White House lawn. President Trump did that when the whole foreign policy establishment for decades could never do something like that. So obviously, whatever Trump did can't be right. And number two, they signed it with Israel, and Israel hasn't made peace with the Palestinians or given away half of its country. So then, therefore, nothing that they could do could be right. So when you take the two, like as Iran calls them, the big Satan and the little Satan, and they're smiling, then you know that that's not something that you should be promoting if you're the progressive liberal news.
I have a question here from Jules in San Francisco. Looks like Wes is not the only guy in San Francisco. Just a moment. Love my espresso. Okay, if the media is dead, what will rise to take its place? Well, I've always said during my 50 years in the media, actually 52, but who's counting, that if the media that we're going to see will have to do 6 different things. It'll have to defend, it'll have to criticize, it'll have to inform, it'll have to entertain, it'll have to remember, and it will have to predict. And it will take us years. We'll be lucky if we can restore our media this decade, but people will have to start reoriented and remaking their entire conception lines. What am I seeing when I see the nightly news? What am I seeing with the New York Times? What am I seeing with Fox? What am I seeing with One America News, these upstarts? And what am I seeing with a news source that didn't exist yesterday? We have a question here from Maurice in Chicago. This will be our last question. What are the chances of a civil war, and what would it look like? I've been predicting a civil war in this country for 2 years. At first, people ignored it. Then they laughed at it. And now they're saying, I think everyone is saying the same thing. We're not going to discuss it now because we're running out of time, but it will be the topic of my very next edition of the Edwin Black Show. Judith, did you want to chime in on that?
Listen, I'm not an expert on when the next civil war is going to happen. I do think that if by some stretch of the imagination Donald Trump can overturn this election, you will see the beginnings of a civil war. I think that the left will rise up in a more violent way than you've seen in some of the cities beforehand, and that could lead to people on the right fighting back, bloodshed, but back and forth. I don't know. It's scary, but while I think that the president has a right and think that he should pursue whatever avenues he has, if this gets overturned by courts or by some legal means, or some votes are thrown out, because even if legally they should be thrown out, I think that you will see an issue.
Okay, so we're out of time, and I thank our dynamic guests, Josh Block, Judah Engelmeyer, and Alex Trayman, as well as the brief participation of Ken Abramowitz. Until we meet again, head over to any Barnes & Noble in the USA or any Amazon platform in 190 countries across this planet, where you can find any of my 200 book editions, such as IBM and the Holocaust, War Against the Weak, and Financing the Flames. Get passwords and access to participate live in future shows at theedwinblackshow.com. You'll see a much enhanced and produced version of this show and prior episodes by subscribing to our YouTube channel at The Edwin Black Show and click that notification button. Follow me at Edwin Black Book on Twitter and Facebook. Want to join our show production group? Email me. Join the team at theedwinblackshow.com. And I'm now zooming out.